Thank you, and thank you for coming in such a short notice as Greg just mentioned. First of all, thank you to the School of Labor and Urban Studies for putting together this program. And we're very happy at the Mexican Studies Institute always to provide spaces where the community can gather and really generate discussion across and around the issues that matter to the community. And the Mexican Studies Institute was founded in 2012, and since then, we are focused on increasing the access to CUNY to students of Mexican descent or Mexican Americans. And we're happy to report these are numbers that are not official yet, but we are growing since we started in CUNY in 2012 to last fall 2018. The enrollment of Mexican American or Mexican students in CUNY grew 44.9%. So we're very happy to report that. But aside from that, we also try to do collaborations with different institutions here and in Mexico. We also have a consortium with Columbia University, with NYU, where we also try to revitalize indigenous languages of Latin America. That's a big program. Another program that we have is also that started in 2012, 2013, was also supported by the Institute of Mexicans Abroad in Mexico, where they provide also seed money for scholarships for students that want to access college in CUNY. So we do some matching funds and also private fundraising. And through the years, we've been able to provide over 200 scholarships to Mexican students and also undocumented students from all nationalities. We have from 10 different countries, or 12 if I'm not mistaken, not only Mexican students. So we're very happy to do that and also to do research around topics of interest to the community and also for researchers. This past year, we were very happy to sign a historic agreement with 8 universities in Mexico. We signed with Colmex, COLEF, CIESAS, UNAM, BUAP, el Instituto Nacional de Lenguas Indígenas, Autónoma de Tlaxcala. I won't translate it because it sounds a little funky in English. And also La Autónoma de Baja California. And I'm missing one, I think. Well, 8 universities. And this year we're going to sign also with UAM. So we're very happy to start this dialogue and provide spaces where we can have academic discussion and we can hear what the community has to ask. So thank you to Gregory, thank you also to Claudio from Columbia University to be here, and also to Roberto Valdovinos from the Institute of Mexican Abroad, and of course to TATIANA CLOUTHIER, Congresswoman from Mexico. Thank you and welcome to CUNY.
I'll be very brief. I'm Claudio Lomnitz. I teach in the anthropology department at Columbia, and I direct our Center for Mexican Studies. Lehman College's Center for Mexican Studies and Columbia's are the 2 centers dedicated to the study of Mexico that exist in the city, and we often collaborate, though we're delighted to be in this space and with such a program today. So first of all, welcome. And also thank you to the Association of Students at Columbia, which was instrumental on our end actually to do this, because I myself had very little hand on our part of it. So thank you for our graduate students who did Columbia's share of the organizing. I'll be very fast in the introductions because you're all here, you know why you're here, and you're not here to hear me. I'll say 2 or 3 brief words about TATIANA CLOUTHIER, who I've just had the honor of meeting myself, and Roberto Valdovinos, who's an old friend and who I'm delighted to see here again in New York, and who probably many of you know, since he's a kind of at least honorary New Yorker himself. So TATIANA CLOUTHIER is, of course, a member of our new Congress in Mexico. And she's originally from Sinaloa, but has had a strong cultural, political life in the state of Nuevo León, in the Monterrey metropolitan region. She's an educator, and she comes from a political family. Her father, of course, Manuel CLOUTHIER, was an extremely instrumental figure in Mexico's transition to democracy. One of the 2 or 3 things that I want to highlight about TATIANA CLOUTHIER that seemed especially interesting to me, at least, is first her her track record points to a fiercely independent person, I have to say. I've just met her, so I can't vouch for that, but you can see that in her track record, including the fact that she distanced herself from the party, her family's original party, in which she had a very active political role and militancy, has participated as the campaign organizer in this stridently successful campaign of Manuel Lopez Obrador for the presidency in 2018. She was his campaign manager, made a tremendous reputation for herself on not only her ability as campaign manager, but specifically around the management of social media. And we are right now in Mexico in a process of deep transformation at the level of the forms of communication, of which I think TATIANA CLOUTHIER has proved to be a kind of master. And then in her brief months in Congress, in this new Congress, she's also had, I believe, quite a distinguished role already, in particular around the discussion of the Guardia Nacional vote, in which, at least as a reader of newspapers, I found her role in some way standing out as a congressperson who was insisting really on raising all the thorny issues and having them discussed on the floor of Congress. So I think that I at least am an admirer of hers, of her independence, and I'm very eager to hear what she has to tell us about social change, about the border crisis in Mexico. I'll go ahead and introduce our second speaker as well, and that way we can hear them. Roberto Valdovinos is now the new director of the Institute of Mexicans Abroad. I believe this is a great moment for that institute. It's an important thing that Roberto, someone like Roberto, is now doing this kind of work. He's someone who's deeply trained in the humanities and in the arts. He's actually a fabulous pianist. If you get a chance one day to hear him, he's trained in philosophy in Paris and in literature here at Columbia University, where he was interested always in issues to do with race, racialization in the history of Mexico, 16th, 17th century history, literary history, and philosophical history. During the process of the most recent elections, Roberto Valdovinos became very deeply involved in the political process, and he really scoured Mexican communities all over the country. He's maybe the person that I know, at least, who's seen the most of the communities that exist across the United States, because he was active in their organization and tied also to Father Solalinde, who some of you know, who's had a deep history of involvement in Central American migration through Mexico and in Mexican migration through the United States. So he's someone who's been deeply committed on the political side, and we now have the luxury of having such a person in a position to rethink Mexican policy as regards to Mexicans here in this country. So I want to welcome both of them, and thank you all for coming.
Hello to everyone. It's a real pleasure to be here. It's the first time that I am out of Mexico, talking in my new position. But it won't be the last, because in the next 3 months I will have to do around 60 and 70 trips to all consulates, to all regions. So it's a pleasure to start with an audience with which I am familiar, and some familiar faces which I haven't seen in some time. It's a real pleasure. I am barely gonna discuss what I consider the main issues or themes of the new government, and then I will dwell on how they apply to the institute I will direct, as it's an important theme for the diaspora. I think it's a good point to start with. I'm gonna mention concerning the new government four themes. Some are obvious and others are not, but let's see them in a bit of detail. First, the end of corruption. That is a basic point, not only for moral reasons, not only because it's something that has been catastrophic for the last decades in Mexico, but also because those resources are needed for the main projects that are going to be taken into action in the next years. Concerning this, you have heard of the huachicol, which has been very famous now, the war against stealing oil in Mexico. But there's one which is perhaps more important because it deeply contrasts with some of the ways in which other countries have made their contemporary politics, and that is the relation between the financial powers or the economic powers and the political powers. That was something, if you were there on the 1st of December, that was very attractive of the speech of the new government, because he clearly said, we are not at all against entrepreneurship, against financial structures, but we want to distinguish them, have them apart from political structures, because they do not necessarily see what most people want. They see what their interest is, and that's what they are made for, and that's very good. But let's keep it apart from politics itself, because otherwise we are not going to make the decisions that most people would want. And that is a theme that today in the US is very actual. It was in the last elections, and it will be in the next years. So we, for once, have a very interesting model to discuss, which is Mexico for the US. End of corruption. The second one is social justice, in the sense that all the programs that will be carried on are meant to attack directly the inequality and the scarcity of resources that concern most of the population in Mexico. As you know, there's more than 40% of the population which is poor in Mexico. Well, you have one of the richest communities at the same time. And for that, you do not have to have an aggressive politics in which you take money apart from people who have it, but you simply have to redistribute money more equitatively. And the first thing for that is fighting against corruption, fighting against what I mentioned before, against the relation of politics and finance. But also, it's a matter of efficacy. And for that, there is an interesting turn in how the programs are being thought. That is, instead of having 200 programs in Cedesol, now Minister of Bienestar, of Well-being, right, the new name. Instead of having 200 programs, you are only going to have 3, and some satellite programs, but only 3 main programs. So all the resources of this very large minister will go to these 3 programs, which concern young people, old people, people who are handicapped, etc., right? And which therefore will be very specific, and so that all energies are concentrated in these 3 or 4 issues. And that's a new way of thinking, because before what you had is a large number of very small programs all around the country. A third thing is transversality. And that is very interesting, because you would say it's normal that when you have a program, it concerns several ministers, so that they should have a discussion and then carry on proposing a program in which they all collaborate. Why hasn't it been the case? Well, I think, in my opinion, the main reason is because most of the people directing these ministers were professional politicians, people who had been politicians all their lives, and who were very interested in having a personal career. So, of course, if you're going to work with someone else, you have to share the credits of the actions you're doing. And for a professional politician, that can be very hard. When suddenly, as it is the case today, you have people from the from the civil society, like Tatiana, or people who are working in cooperatives, in micro enterprises with indigenous people, like the new Secretary of Well-being. Well, then you have people who are really concerned about the programs they are doing, and not necessarily, and not only about the personal credit. So for them, it's much easier to work together. And at the same time, you had a whole integration of the movement, in which in every reunion you seem to have all the time at least 2 or 3 future secretaries. I'm speaking of the transition, and that is still the case today. Most of the programs are being thought in this transversal way, and this is very good, because you do not have as many duplications of programs as you would have when you have the Minister of Education doing something, the Minister of Well-being doing something that is very similar, but they do not communicate. So in the end, you stop knowing with whom you're working, right? And the fourth line, very quickly, in my opinion, is the reconceptualization of the national program. And that can seem polemical, because most researchers or intellectuals today would say that the nation or the notion of nation is not valid anymore, or it doesn't comply with the new exigencies of the 21st century. But still, the discussion of what the nation should be, given that all our constitutions, starting with the U.S. and ending with anyone you want, they speak of the nation. It's still a very interesting discussion that we should have. And in the case of Mexico, there are some lines which give you this feeling of what is the conceptualization of the notion of nation. One of them is this idea of the respect of foreign sovereignty. There has been a discussion around this in the case of Venezuela, and the answer of Mexico, I'm not defending it, I'm just commenting it, is we shouldn't be for or against. We can be personally for or against, of course we can, but as a state, we must respect the sovereignty of other states to decide what their situation is, even in the worst of those situations. Because if we take the position of saying that we should decide what others must or should have, then others can decide for us, and we don't want that. So starting from the national principle, it's a conception of nation that is new. It isn't new really, because it was the notion of Mexico for many decades, but it hasn't been for the last 20, 30 years. A second one is the relation with the diaspora. When you have 10% of your population abroad, well, the discussion is very particular. And what the president is mentioning in private and in public is that the diaspora for the first time will be represented and will have an important role in the construction of the new projects of the country. That is very interesting, because the diaspora is not only, when you say 12 million, it's 12 million people and their descendants, and those who feel Mexican or those who have a connection with Mexico in any way. And then we're speaking of perhaps 35 million Mexican Americans, 50 million Hispanics, which are also our brothers and our sisters. And that is a discussion that is for the first time in this last 3 decades, let's say, being discussed seriously, in my opinion. And the third line of this national program is the cultural project. There has been very important programs for culture, even in the last presidencies. However, there hasn't been a national project of culture. And the discussion that we are having with the Minister of Culture and with the Minister of Foreign Relations is how are we gonna have this? How are we gonna reflect on this problem or this issue? It's not necessarily a problem, so that we can project the image of Mexico in Mexico and abroad in a new way that is at the same time cosmopolitan, which agrees with the contemporary trends of how the world is thinking of culture, of music, of arts, but at the same time that it has a local identity that we can connect and feel connected to as a nation or as a series of nations inside the Mexican territory, and the people abroad, this 10% is diaspora. And that is a very interesting discussion. When you see the history of Mexico, that was, well, Claudio is an expert of this theme, but it was a very important discussion of post-revolutionary Mexico. And until the 50s, you had this incredible muralist movement and all these musical trends and artistic trends, which were precisely this connection of these two worlds, how to be related with Picasso and at the same time with local indigenous cultures that gave sense, a particular sense to the local reality. And that is the discussion that we're having now. But of course, we're not going to recover what was made in the 50s, because we're not in the 50s anymore. So the discussion has two new dimensions. One is the historical depth of it, and that is how are we going to connect with the past of Mexico, with this revolutionary past, but also with the colonial past, and also with the indigenous past, which has always been the case, sort of, in Mexico, but also with the colonial past, right? the historical depth that a country that is 500 years old may have. And on the other side, this is the spatial diversity of Mexico, the diaspora of which I was talking about. What is the Chicano movement for us today? What are the Hispanic movements for us today? And this reflection, I'm insisting on this because 2 or 3 weeks from now, a month from now, we're gonna have a extremely beautiful festival, cultural festival in Los Angeles on this theme, but it hasn't been presented, so it's just I didn't say anything. Concerning the Institute of Mexicans Abroad, well, we're having the same discussion because we are there to dwell with I mean, our objective, our population is the Mexican diaspora. It's all the people abroad, in the U.S. or elsewhere, but in the U.S. there's almost everyone is in the U.S. 98% of the diaspora is in the U.S. Therefore its importance. But there is a discussion that hasn't taken place, and it has to take place now, is with whom are we dealing? Are we dealing with migrants who have been 30 years in the U.S. and have this incredible nostalgia, very sad, but very powerful nostalgia for their hometowns? Are we dwelling with those who have a visa and are students like you? Or are we speaking rather of those who are second and third generations? They don't have a Mexican passport, but they speak and eat like us, but in a different way at the same time. So which is our public, and what are we doing this for? And for that, there are 2 lines. And I'm going to only mention them in general, because later we have a forum which is very specific on the subject. One of them is, how do we conceive the notion of helping? One of the main themes of this institute is to help the population abroad. And for that, there's a series of programs on health, on financial education, on culture. But these programs, in my opinion, have been thought, as most programs in Mexico have been thought, when they are meant for vulnerable people. They are assistentialists. They are there only to help. So you give a bit of money, here and there, $1,000 for a festival. If someone has a problem, you help them in specific ways. But they are not meant as an integral way of helping. And I'm going to explain this in a moment. When I saw this, I didn't agree, because it was taking almost 90% of the budget, or 3 minutes, the budget, right? And I was saying to myself, but we have people who really need this money in Chiapas. Why are we spending it in the U.S. if we could spend it in Chiapas? That was a discussion that I was having with myself. It's in dollars. It's much more expensive. It's much harder. So what would justify this way of helping? And beyond the legal and the moral reasons and the financial reasons, because Mexicans' remittances from people in the U.S. are so important, etc. There is this idea, okay, that of course they are Mexicans, of course they are extremely important for our history, for our identity, and it's the moment we should do it, but it must be an integral help. And by this I mean that whenever you give $1 to someone who needs it, you need to think, how are you gonna get them involved, make them create advocacy, create people who are gonna help at the same time other people. So instead of receiving help from the consulate, what we want to do is have the consulate at our charge do capacitaciones, trainings and internships, so that the communities themselves can reproduce this way of helping others. And then you have a program which is ethically correct, because we are spending it in a correct way, in a program for the future. And the last thing I'm going to mention is, well, what for? Finally, all this. My thought on this is that the line that was given by the president for this institute is, you are there to defend, protect was the word, and represent the people and let them know that they are represented by Mexico. You're going to be the link between the Mexican programs and the diaspora in all its senses, in all its diversity in the US. But this has implications on how we think it, and my guess is it's not a national program, or not only. It's a program of the richness, of the diversity of a very large population. All these sorts of identities, Chicano, second generation, migrants who have been here for 20, 30 years, they are this diversity. And what we're here to do is show this not only to the US government, but to everyone, to ourselves in a way, so that we can be proud of the richness of this diversity. It's a global program, and that's part of the main program of the so this new conception of sovereignty that I was discussing in the beginning. Well, I'm gonna end here because I don't wanna surpass my time, and Tatiana will say much more important things. But yeah, it's a pleasure talking to you about this program. If you wanna know more, please tell me, and I will send you the detailed program with much pleasure. Thank you.
Well, good afternoon. I'm having a problem talking today, but we hope that can be managed. I know you have a lot of questions, and most of the time we come here and we talk, and you are the one who has a question. So I'm just going to give a very short introduction so you can ask all the questions that you want, and we can see if we can answer them or not. I'm a Congresswoman at this moment, and we ended the first period of the Congress from September to December, and I'm just gonna let you know what happened and how are we working in Congress. First of all, I'm gonna be maybe obvious, but I prefer to be so than not to do so. We are 500 members in Congress. For the campaign, 3 parties ran together to make the coalition that brought Mr. Lopez Obrador into power. That is Morena, which has the majority in Congress. The other one is El PT, which is a party that has been with him in the last 2 elections, so that worked with him on the last 2 elections. And then you have another one, which is Encuentro Social, which is a party that disappeared. That means they didn't get enough votes as to continue as a party. All these 3 parties together form the coalition, and we have a simple majority in Congress. It is important to say, Dios de mi vida. Okay. It is important to say that we need, and this morning somebody asked me the question, so I'm gonna be very careful just to give you numbers and facts. This is not saying it is good or it is bad, it is just facts. In order to change the Constitution in Mexico, you need 2/3 of the vote. The coalition doesn't have them, and this is something to make clear many of the suppositions that come in the newspapers, in the news, and even in people's minds, no? So this is the first statement I wanna leave clear. Secondly, we have voted on the first period many of the things that we promised on the campaign. And when I say we, it's because we did campaign and we promised things that were gonna happen so the government would be able to work. That doesn't mean that we do not have a division of powers. That doesn't mean you don't have the executive power, the judicial, and the legislative. But it is important when I say we, is that we have a promise that we have to make these changes. And from these changes, I'm just gonna give some of them that we passed, and what are the ones that we're gonna be working on this period that just started a few days ago. We voted, first of all, a law to create the Instituto Nacional Indigenista, which is something that Roberto was saying in a way, even though he didn't put it that way. It is the first time that you put, or you visualize, or we make as a country an important issue about the origins of the people in our country. And this is very important in many ways, not only sociological speaking, but also politically speaking. And in Congress, we have many congressmen and congresswomen that come from indigenous groups. And this is very enriching and has brought to the discussion a new way to put things into the table. Another one thing that we voted And even though it is stated on the line, it passed it, but not the way we want it, so we're gonna retry it. It is to take away privilege to the people that are in government, that are elected, and even to the president, that is not have immunity, in the law or towards the law. No, I don't know if you know, but we have what it's called fuero, and the fuero used to be a way for people in Congress to be able to say what they wanted to say with no consequence, legally speaking. But that was taken, as any congressman, as any politician can do whatever they want, and there are no consequences, legally speaking, at all. So we're taking that and we're working on that to be taken away. Then the austerity that President Lopez Obrador wants to put in all the things that are happening in Mexico, and Roberto put it in another way. He says, well, there's a lot of corruption, yes, but there is also a lot of spending on things that are necessarily needed. And not because we don't like good things or not, but I can spend my money, my personal money, or anything that I want with my money, but not with the money of the people, which is totally different. If I want to buy a bottle of champagne, I can drink it myself, but I cannot buy champagne with the money of the people, which is different, no? And in this law, what it says is that nobody can win or earn more than the president, which at this moment, the amount of money that the president makes is 180 and something pesos. And also we shrink, in a way, all the secretarias. They have like 7, in some ways, even 5, or 7 and 5 subsecretarias, and we've made of them 3 or 4, and that makes that we took away many positions that were clearly political and not necessarily of the people that work every day. Then we restructured the government, that is on la Secretaría de Gobernación, the one that is in charge of the internal matters. It was hand by hand with security. We separated security from that one. We approved the budget and the law of income. And I want to say some things that we did in Congress ourselves that I think that are important, because people in Mexico ask themselves pretty often, what is Congress good for? No? So we cut from September to December 490 million pesos. Yes, like that. That means congressmen and congresswomen will receive a lot of extra payment, if we want to call it that way, son prestaciones, I don't know how to, benefits, okay? That was a congressman had a special or private health care insurance, not using the public institutions. And I believe that the fact that we use the public institution is going to make that a way to have 500 people supervising, for the good and for the bad, but 500 people supervising, and in that way, we're really gonna be seeing what's happening and what's not happening in the health institutes in our country. Another thing that we took away was we used to be paid when you're in Congress, your meals. I don't hear, or maybe a very few business pay you your meals, no? Well, congressmen and congresswomen were paid their meals in Congress. That was taken away, and that was part of the 490 million pesos that were taken away. Then they used to have a caja de ahorro, a saving, okay? But that was, you put 1 peso, and the Congress will put another peso, no? So that was the way that it came. So it was taken away too. And then 2,000 people were not hired anymore. They were hired by contract, and they were hired the last year of Congress, which comes to be that they were not necessarily being hired to work in Congress, thus to work on political campaigns, and that it's not something that we as Mexicans with our taxes will be having to pay. They were taking away also cars and telephones. No, I mean, they are not paid anymore by the Congress. We have to pay them ourselves, no? I say this, and this be very simple and obvious, but it has a very big meaning to the people that voted and say, we are sick of having too many privilege to the people that come into power and that spend our money the way they want and do not serve the people. So more or less, these are some changes that we did in Congress, 2 of them that are coming for this new period, and that is the educational reform and the labor reform. I was very pleased to hear over here that you have work, or you have a lot of investigation research on that subject. So maybe that would be a good idea that we get some help from you as to see what things have worked and what have not worked over here. So this is more or less what we have done, and actually I'm pretty pleased to be here, and I'm very happy to hear that over here you are trained, or they teach you social justice, mobility, and train people, minorities, to run into office. And I think in this way that this is 3 things that President Lopez Obrador is trying to do in our country. Thank you very much.
Thank you all very much. For people who have questions for the panel, for any of the speakers, you can please line up here. And we just ask you to keep, your questions relatively short, so many people have the opportunity to ask their questions. So feel free to just come up here. And maybe we'll start. We have a question submitted by the community here at the School of Labor and Urban Studies for the panel. Recently, AMLO agreed to the Remain in Mexico deal with the U.S., in which the Mexican government would provide humanitarian care and support for all of the migrants at the U.S.-Mexico border applying for asylum or refugee status from the U.S., but potentially ending the previous system that allowed those seeking refuge or asylum to wait here in the U.S. A growing concern is that the new administration may continue making concessions to the U.S., but not promote migration policy proposals that will require changes to U.S. policies. So the question is, what are AMLO's plans? What are the new government's plans to negotiate a strong binational agreement with the U.S. that proposes concrete fixes to migration policies affecting Mexicans and Central Americans, especially focusing on the reunification of families and the decriminalization of migrants, refugees, and asylum seekers?
Hello? Yes. Well, first of all, I think the first part is not completely accurate. Mexico was not complying with this new politics as such. Mexico responded to the implementation of Section 235, B2C, right, of the immigration law. But the Mexican position was humanitarian. That means that we were not, Mexico was not agreeing as such to the implementation of this immigration law, in this section of the immigration law. It was simply having a humanitarian reaction because one person was being sent back to Mexico without Mexico being consulted on the matter. So I wouldn't say that Mexico is taking a position on the issue and is complying with this new change in the immigration policy of the U.S. At the same time, well, there are several things that Mexico is doing to change this, let's say, this conception of immigration policies in general. And the most visible one is the program that Mexico has put forward with the U.S. and Canada to promote the development of Central America and the south of Mexico. That is a very serious program. At least in its conception, it's a very serious intention to change things. First of all, because it concerns the problem of migration as a development issue. And that is the great change, because it contradicts completely this idea that migrants are coming here to invade or are bad in any way simply because they are coming. They are fleeing bad conditions in their country of origin, which is in general the case in Central America now because of the political and the economic situation they are living. And having this policy, well, clearly Mexico is already taking a step in the direction that it should be, that every country in my thought should be taking.
Hello, Tatiana. I follow you on Twitter, and I think you're brilliant. I admire your intelligence, and I hope one day you become Mexico's president. The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change from the United Nations, the U.S. National Assessment on Climate paint a dire picture on the future. As a result of CO2 emissions, we expect severe consequence on severe weather, migration, and the ecosystems. One solution that has been widely adopted is the electrification of transportation and renewable energy. In Mexico, however, we seem to be going the wrong way with the investment plans related to fossil fuels, the refinery. Now we want to refurbish coal power plants, and then Manuel Diaz, president of the CFE. So there are things that don't make a lot of sense. So my question to you is, how do you reconcile that on one hand we have the responsibility to act on climate change and reduce CO2 emissions, and on the other we have these investment plans? And so that's the question. And then we need your help on the transmission lines to connect Baja California with the national electric systems, and we need your help with the long-term auctions. In Mexico, we need the state and we need the private sector to really do something about climate change. Thank you.
Okay, first, if I'm understanding, the connection from Baja California, that's something that was not clear to me. Connection.
Transmission line to connect the national electric system with the
Yeah,
Baja California
okay,
system.
okay. I take that one with me, and I talk to Bartlett about it. On the second thing about climate change, I think definitely this is something we have to put a lot of attention on, but not only that, Josefa Gonzalez, which is the one in charge of the Secretaría de Medio Ambiente, she's pretty much, she was an activist, if we want to call it that way, before she came into the position she has. So she really understands what's happening. She really understands and sees what has to be done. And I think that what we're seeing only is the investments, the great investment we're having in putting the money as to have the refinerías work again, no? But we are investing in renewable energy. There is a lot of investment going on too, with private sector, with a government that is not only putting the refineries. What's happening? This is what calls everybody. I mean, this is the subject what Andres Manuel says one time, another time. And since all the huachicol and the gasolina is happening, this is what we all see. But it is not the only investment we are having. We have as a country, or the country has clearly, that you cannot put all the eggs in the same, I mean, in only one basket, and especially when we have to move on with climate change.
Hi. This question is for Mr. Valdovinos. I'm curious about how is this new structure that you talk about of the 10% diaspora in the United States, how would that new structure look like? How creative is it?
How what?
How would it, the new vision that you have about the Chicanos and the Mexican citizens that are in the U.S., how would that structure look like? How creative is it? Would it be outreach? What type of outreach would it be? And would it be within, I'm just curious how, and yes.
Just very fast. My view on this, it's the same with the financial structure and with the artistic structure. All the Mexican diplomacy has been concerned with two groups, okay? Either the elite or the communitarian in the most vulnerable sense. And they are two important aspects, right? So you go speak to people in Wall Street, or you go help those who cannot have a bank account because they have no papers. But what happens to the million people who are investing want to invest in a small scale in their states of origin, who have a restaurant or 10 restaurants or 50 restaurants? They are invisible with respect to the Mexican politics, the diplomacy. They have been invisible with respect to the Mexican diplomacy. The same with art. When you speak of how the diplomacy is concerned with art, either you give $1,000 for a little event for the 5th of May, el Cinco de Mayo, so that migrants can be happy, or you give, or you bring Lila Downs or Alfonso Cuarón to an event where they can speak about what is art. But there are 1 million artists in the middle, which are making incredible films, making incredible exhibitions. Some of them are Mexicans, and they have been living here for a long time. Others are not even born in Mexico, and they have incredible things to show. And they are invisible for two reasons. One, because, well, I will only mention one. I think it's an ideological thing. We think in terms of binarity, of nations. So they either belong to the US or they belong to Mexico. And when they belong to both, or they belong to this flux in the middle, this sort of métissage of this mix, this hybridization, it's very hard to get them to see them as a goal, right, for public policies. And my first point is we have to address this issue, and that has to be our main public. This, let's say, middle class, this very large middle class of artists, of entrepreneurs, etc., etc. Now, how would it look like? Well, there are many programs. It depends on what we're talking. Just to give one example, yesterday I had a meeting with the director of the Cineteca Nacional, an incredible person, and we got to several agreements. And one of them was, I am to find in the next weeks a series of filmmakers in the U.S. who are either Chicanos or Hispanics or Mexicans living in the U.S. who are writing on subjects of migration, of binationality, of identity. And we're going to make a festival, not only in the Cineteca Nacional, but in the 30 cinemas and for 2 weeks in this year, and it's not in 2 years, showing their films all around Mexico. It's a small example, but it's a way of how we get involved with this population. And the way we do this, we don't have much resources. We only have the power to link institutions and peoples and organizations between them. So we want to link organizations in the US with the institutes and organizations in Mexico to create these sort of programs.
Okay, sure. Thank you.
Good afternoon. I'm honored to be here with all of you. As a retired New York City public school teacher, I have, of course, been watching the education world in Mexico very carefully for many years. And I am delighted to hear that the president has stated that he would overthrow the education reforms that the prior administration put in place. They have been, as you know, very unpopular, especially with the indigenous communities who feared the loss of their native language in the schools, and with, of course, the teachers who feared the over-testing of their students and their evaluations being looked at through testing, which is a negative thing that's been happening in our country. So my question is, it's a good thing to overturn those reforms, but I'm wondering how will the new administration look at it? Will they go back to the way things were? Will they put in place organizations so that the teacher unions can have a say, and so that indigenous communities and local communities can have a say? What is the plan? Thank you.
Okay, first of all, the reform from the president was presented already on the 12th of December in Congress. I have it in my suitcase just to read it. But let me tell you what are the things that we're doing and where do we want to go to? First, what are the things we don't want to be repeated? Evaluation was a main issue because evaluation was being used as an excuse to send teachers to their home and not hire them or not continue paying them. And the evaluation was the same one for everyone in the same way. Nonetheless, the circumstances of each people were very different. So we're saying we're gonna have to evaluate, but depending of areas and circumstances, no? So you're not gonna be having the same test for everyone. Another thing that we're gonna be having to consider is education has changed. I mean, the teacher doesn't do the same training that they used to do. The students, especially the smaller ones, they learn different than what we used to learn before. So you have to go, I mean, you're gonna have to train the teachers in a different way because they were trained 20 years ago and we are not retraining them, and you're testing them with new things, but you're not putting money as to retrain them. So another thing is retrain so they can keep on the places where they are. When you're talking about the unions, we are opening for the first time, and we're discussing this on the labor reform, that unions have to be democratic. And that's like the first step. By the teachers are the ones that have to use their freedom to choose. If they don't do it, nobody's gonna do it for them. And this is like a rocking chair because it moves from one way to another. They come to you, they express themselves, and they say, we want democracy, but they don't exercise it. Then you have another of the big areas that we're putting into this change is we want the schools to go, you will come on lower school, you will leave to your house around 1 o'clock. We want full-time schools so the kids can stay there because their mothers work or their parents work, and the kids will stay. And at this moment, what we're doing the hearings. First of all, between the election of the 1st of July and transition, we did many focus groups, and we hear the teachers, what they wanted, and we already took that, and that's the way it came as a proposition to the reform. And at this moment, as Congress, we're listening. What else do they want? One of the things that we cannot do and nobody can't do. Some of them, and I was even talking to some teachers, they want to be paid sometimes what they haven't been paid, I don't know for how long. And you cannot go back that far. I mean, we're starting, and you have to be real, and you have to say, okay, we're here, and this is what are we gonna do with what we have? Not what you wanted, or they promised you I don't know when, or somebody said. So that's more or less what we're doing at this moment. I have the reform if you want. I can I can copy it and I leave a copy here, or you can find it on the Gaceta Parlamentaria on the 12th of December. Okay.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for this opportunity. Una admiración. This is what I have to say. I really admire you. And what I want to say is I'm very proud. I'm very proud of Roberto You have one of the best. I know for firsthand that he worked for the community. He worked very hard. He was in the campaign. But my question here is, I work for Human Services, and I want to ask you what you're going to do for the women that they run from Mexico, they may be persecuted for those huge things, domestic violence or human trafficking. What we're going to do about those women? I have these experiences, and I've been working with a lot of women, and those women are indigenous, and they have a tremendous power to be successful in this country. I recently have one woman, and I was telling her that she can do whatever she can, and she was telling me no, because I'm indigenous, and that broke my heart. What the new president and what you as a woman, and firsthand of our president, what are you gonna do for those women? What are they here?
Okay, I think Roberto you're gonna have many things to say about it, but I tell you, what are the things that are changing? And again, I go back to say, first when you say you admire, I think we cannot admire anything in any other person if we don't have it. So just take it for you. Let me tell you about the woman. I think that the fact that the movie Roma, which is very well known at this moment, has an indigenous woman as the main character, it is changing the view from everyone. I believe it seems to be something very simple, but it is making something very obvious, and it is talking about the potential. And you're seeing this woman that is breaking, in many ways, all the stereotypes of what we thought was to be X, Y, and no? And I believe that it is like a moment where they're opening a door for all these women. And I go back to say what I said a few minutes ago. We approve the Instituto Nacional Indigenista. This is another way to say that the government is opening and is giving attention, a voice, and also stress the things that need to be stressed and to be follow of these groups of people that were left behind long ago. And again, in Congress, I can tell you we have this beautiful, this woman that come from indigenous, that they feel proud to wear the clothes, that they have a voice, that they are very well prepared, and that they are surprising everyone every time they're going to take the microphone and make a statement. This is what's happening, no? And now you say, what are we doing? Okay, we are gonna have to change, and not only all these feminicidios that are happening. President Lopez Obrador is making a program to attend feminicidios, but I think there is not, you have to take the press, you have to take the redes sociales, you have to do it in a school and everywhere, campaigns, as to give people information on what happens and how the trata takes away the girls and all their dreams and all the things that they believe they can do if they go with someone, or they even, rape them. And we're working on that with the government. We're working on that in Congress. And I think one of the main things that we have to do has to do with education. Education. When I say education, it is not only formal education, no? It is education and prevention in all senses. And I believe you have something to say on this, no?
Well, just really fast. I believe that any social justice program for vulnerable people, groups, must have an emphasis on minorities and on gender issues. And it's something that hasn't been necessarily the case in all programs. It depends on how, because the institute I will be directing now has the power to give instructions to consulates on social programs they do. And many times, well, it depends on how the consulates themselves, the consul general, conceives these issues. So you have some I won't give names, who are really involved with gender issues and have programs specifically for women, which are very important. But it's not a general thing. So we are planning of generalizing this with a series of protocols so that women are very present in this. But not because they are women, but for two reasons. One of them because of the equality principle, in which we believe, which is not only a social economic principle, it's also an identity principle, equality of the minorities, diversity, etc. And the second one is because women are extremely important in their communities, in the Mexican population. Whenever you want to organize something, if you have organized something, you do not work so much with men, you work with women. Why? Because you have often a machist society in which men are working all day, and it's women who organize everything and who go to churches and who have all the networks. So if you want to do something well, you need to have a woman, otherwise it won't work. So when we're addressing these issues, all these sorts of vulnerabilities, and we want people to get involved, women are the main population with which we're going to be working. Yeah.
Vanessa, just a few more minutes, maybe just one. Tatiana, it's anything that you also going to do with the bullies, for the men, para los hombres que atacan a las mujeres que trabajamos para proteger a otras mujeres.
Okay, one of the things that has happened, and we are discussing this, the way we are addressing violence, family violence or violence against women, has not been taking into consideration men, and I think we're doing that wrong. And they have not been taken into consideration in many ways. We work it and say we need gender equality, and we empower women, but we never turn around to ask men and say, how do you feel about this? And we don't know what we raised on them, and we don't know what happened on them. And I think we have to reconsider the way we're doing things when we are empowering women, in the sense that we have to empower men and the new changes that woman is having. And we didn't do that for a long time. So one of the main changes that we have to say or to start with is consider men's opinion in that way, not in other ways. Secondly, what people tell us, police, what happened, or ministeriales, when they go into a house because violence is happening, they take away the woman as to prevent her from being beaten again. And they take her away. But another one comes and it is beaten again. That means you don't work with the man. You don't work with him to understand why is he beating. You don't make changes in him. You just treat him as a golpeador, not because he is not, but no. So we have to put an eye and money on treatment for the men too. And those are the things that I believe we need to do differently. Otherwise, there is no way we can stop this.
Thank you.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. This is not a question, but more than a question, is a petition. I'm happy to have you here in New York. I've been working hard with Roberto, all this. We were doing campaigning for the party and for Lopez Obrador. And I want to raise the voice so many Mexicans who went outside and vote for Lopez Obrador and for the party. We are concerned about his security, and we want to ask to everyone who is listening by social media to go outside on the streets and ask to Lopez Obrador to follow what he say. He say he's going to listen to the people, and the people is asking now to get security because he's fighting big gangsters. He's fighting the corruption, and he's doing a big change. So right now, people is asking for him to get security. He don't want to get security. He say people is going to take care of him. Well, if he don't get security, then I'll ask everybody who's listening today, and we go outside the streets, raise money and pay security for him, or campaigning. Do some campaign and do something because we, the people we vote for him, we are very concerned about his security. So I want to ask Tatiana, do you have a plan or something on Congress to do something about this? Because people is asking and is very concerned about this.
I don't think this is a matter of Congress in a way. And I tell you, I promise I will tell him what I heard here. But I invite you to do something else. Let's do a hashtag with him. And let's put him and tag him. And let's tell him that we want him to take care of himself. Because if something happens to him, no? Let's do a hashtag on that and let's put a pressure on another way instead of just saying, no?
Thank
Yeah.
you. What about?
And I will take your comment to him.
Thank you. I'm thinking the hashtag could be security for ANLO. Hashtag security for ANLO. How about that?
Hello, and thank you so much for being here. And my question is more about public health in Mexico. So recently, I traveled with my mother to el Estado de Mexico because mi abuela estaba en el hospital. And while I was there, we noticed the conditions of the hospital, which was un hospital del Seguro Popular. And we noticed how much of a difference there is between hospitals para la gente pobre y los ricos. And so my question is, considering your honorable intentions to reduce the privilege for those people in the upper class, how does Mexico ensure that money is being directed towards the public health system for the people of Mexico? Thank you.
Okay, two things. I don't know if I just want to make clear because of your comment. I'm not saying that I want to take privilege from the people who have money. We're talking about people who are elected, people who get into power as to serve as politicians, just to make clear and not to let anybody think something that I didn't say, first of all. Secondly, actually I was with President Lopez Obrador on Wednesday. Well, Wednesday or Thursday, I don't know. Well, I was with him, and one of the things
That's
he
why she
told
talks
me,
like this, because it was a long meeting.
and what he tells me is that he is surprised to see how the health issue in Mexico is even worse than the security issue. What do I mean by that? It is what you're talking about. Corruption became one of the ways first, long ago, we did have corruption, but there were like two areas that they didn't touch, and one of them was health. Now they didn't have any concern at all. So we do have this big problem, and he is doing a movement. Actually, he says he's like doing, he's putting a special attention and money to the subject of health. He believes that if we change the health system, the benefits and the infrastructure and the medicine and the care that the people get, that can change everything for everyone, especially to the people who have less opportunities. I tell you, my husband had cancer, and when we came out of the chemios, they would give him a shot, and the shot costed 60,000 pesos, each shot. And he says, can I get it in the IMSS? Because he pays IMSS, and they say, no, they don't have it there because it's too expensive. And he asks, what happens then? And he says, the people have to survive on that. And that's what we're trying to fight. And that's what we don't want to continue happening. And that's the reason why Lopez Obrador has said, he says, we're gonna improve the conditions of the no more buildings. He says that he's gonna just do 2 new hospitals. And he knows already where they're gonna be. They say the names already. Says then, finish the ones that were not finished. Previous governments built the the building, and they left. And there are elefantes blancos there. And the third one is improve what is already there, because we know in what conditions are they, no? So that's his main issue, is health, okay?
Hi, thank you so much for speaking here and for the whole audience and the institution supporting this. I just came back from 4 weeks in Oaxaca and a little in Chiapas and spoke with so many people, particularly indigenous people, who were so proud of the election and hopeful for Lopez Obrador, which is wonderful because it allows for mobilization of the people. But the three things that they talked about, that the people I spoke with talked about, was the minimum wage, price floors on agricultural products for landholders, and also the work permits for Central Americans coming in. These were so important because they represent some big commitments to change. And of course, the beginning of a progressive administration is an open door that you have to run through because it closes quickly. So that set of questions. The other question I want to ask is really about climate change, and to follow up on the earlier speaker on climate change. So we know that about 1/3 of all greenhouse gases comes from agriculture. And I saw in Oaxaca that there are more and more agroecology programs, but they're small, they're NGOs. I don't know to what extent the government is advancing agroecology, because that sequesters carbon as opposed to expelling carbon, which is what we now call conventional or corporate agriculture does. So that's one. The other is the question of rural electrification. I've seen it in many nations of Latin America, like Bolivia, for example. Progressive administration comes in and they promise electrification, but they bring in fossil fuel electrification instead of renewable energy, which is much more effective in these rural areas anyway, because you don't have to string electricity all the way through the nation, but just to grow the renewable energy. And then finally, what is Lopez Obrador and your government doing about advancing wind and solar energy? You said, well, you're doing all of it, but to put in new pipelines, to put in, that is pipelines for oil and gas, is to go with an old technology as opposed to a new technology that will make more jobs and save the planet for the humans. Thank you.
Okay. You asked me too many questions, but let's see. Minimum wage, first. Minimum wage is going to change, and it changed it already on the border of the north part of Mexico. President Lopez Obrador did a decreto where it says not only the minimum wage, but also two other taxes change. Once you get as a enterprise, you sign in a list, and you follow certain requirements and on that part. So I believe that maybe for next year, we're going to be ready as a country as to have the change of the minimum wage national-wise. On the other hand, for the Central America, you're going to respond for that, Roberto. With the agriculture, there is a lot of emphasis put on not only with agriculture, but also on things on environmental improvement. One of the programs that Lopez Obrador has is the one, ¿cómo se llama? You plant, Sembrando Vida, okay? Growing life. And it is about, they have to plant every year, and I don't know the number, certain amount of trees that are from fruits or they are for wood in the southern part of Mexico. And in the the southern part of Mexico, there are 5 states that are going to be participating on that one. So that's gonna be helping climate change in many ways, but also the culture of the people that you will be taking away as to, I mean, the trees has to be using that material to live because they're helping you with other ways. On agriculture, they are using programs with organic agriculture, if we want to call it that way. No, that's something that is being put into the table for the programs, especially the social programs on the poorest areas of Mexico. Electrification. They are doing investment in many ways, and most of them, and even in Chiapas, which is kind of ridiculous, you saw it, or that they have the solar panels, no? They have it every 5 meters, no? But they're changing to solar panels, especially on the rural areas. The municipalities are doing pretty much that because the mayors don't want to spend more money on that. Not necessarily for environmental things, but they say, this is less expensive for me. I might as well put it. So this is a big change that is happening, not only on the rural areas, but also on the cities, no? And also mayors are doing some transformation with the garbage as to be processed in a way that it becomes energy, and then they buy it cheaper, and they're using that. That's something that is happening in many of the big cities because they're the ones that have more garbage. But that's something we're doing already, and we are improving, and we are increasing in all the areas that we can.
I just want to add something about the program Sembrando Vida. It's a wonderful program because not only are you having an ecological reflex, it's really an ecological program because you are there's a whole process of reforestation, but also that takes into account which is the local fauna and the local products, plants and trees that should be in the region. But there's a third issue that Tatiana mentioned. I only will underscore it because it's very important. The social sense of it. Often when we think of ecology and the environment, we tend to forget that, especially in countries like Canada or the US, where society, it's developed to a certain point, that in many countries like Brazil, Mexico, and parts of Africa, you have the same environmental issues, but they are always at the same time social issues. And the way to solve the problem is not to have investments from outside ecological projects that at the same time keep the problem, which at the beginning was probably a social problem, no? But rather to have programs which are integral and who address both issues, environmental and social. And so this is a program, it's not made by the environment minister, it's made by the well-being minister in charge of social programs. And it's a program for giving work to regions with high migration, regions which have no work, which have development issues. So you're doing both at the same time. And that's going to make them sustainable and valid in the middle and the long term. That's why they are beautiful.
Thank you.
Hello, thank you for listening to our inquiries. Under this new government and new officials coming to the consulates, what are the changes to the Mexican consulate ways of functioning and serving efficiently the Mexican diaspora under this new era? We're really looking forward for this change for the new officials.
Yeah, there are going to be many changes, but they are in the process of being processed, because there are two things. One is we have limited resources, and the other one, there is a whole system, which is very interesting, the exterior service of Mexico, which has a long trajectory, and you cannot simply change it just like that. So what we're doing is making a whole diagnosis of everything we have and how we can use it in a better way, in terms of efficiency, of better social programs, more integral social programs, as I said, and also of inclusivity, so that they can concern not only the most vulnerable groups, they will concern the most vulnerable groups, but also groups from different stratas of society. So my answer is, in a couple or 2 or 3 months, there will be important changes, but they are being discussed.
Thank you.
Hello, my name is Carlos from Columbia University. I have a very short but maybe difficult question for Tatiana Clouthier. In an act of self-criticism, what do you think the government should change in order to be better? And what things do you think they shouldn't have done, the wrong decisions in these 3 months? Thank you.
First, I think 3 months is too short. No, you cannot ask me in 6 months. I mean, you can evaluate in 6 months. You cannot see what's really happening or what's going to be the benefits of things that are done. What I have said already is that it is hard to keep the rhythm of a president. That's what I have said, with all the good things of that and with the bad things of going too fast.
Just a clarification, when I speak of change in the consular programs, I mean my area. Just a clarification for everyone, the consular structure is divided into 3 areas, which are documentation, so those who do documents, any paperwork that you need. The second one is protection, so it's the connection and the payment of specific lawyers and legal areas for the defense of migration issues. And the third one is communities, right, which is the one that is at the charge of the Institute of Mexicans Abroad. So I'm speaking of changes in my area, not of the whole consular structure by itself. That those are different programs, and they are not concerned by us directly.
Thanks. Kind of wondering if we could have done this in Spanish. But due to my work, due to my personal life, I spend a lot of time in China, in France, and here. And being there, I've realized that there's like a huge national plan for expanding their businesses around the world, right? And when I look at Mexico, it seems like we only have Corona, you know, like, and I know like the business and the industry in Mexico is huge, right? Huge, huge, huge. So I was wondering if there's like a strategic plan for expanding the Mexican industry around the world, and where are we going to see more Cinépolis and more Michoacanas and more Maves and everything expanding through the world? And I think it's important to bring in wealth into the nation as well.
You do have a lot of more than Corona. That's the one we like. You have tequila. You have pollo loco. No? You have avocado. Jesus Seade, it's the one in charge of, seeing how we're gonna work as to expand more Mexican industries into other parts of Mexico. But from what I hear, and every time I talk to businessmen, and even to some embassies, I hear them saying that Mexico has business with them. You have Cemex, you have Alfa, you have production of other things. So I don't know if they have it as a program. As a goal, and I have to ask on that. But I do have more than Corona. We do have more than Corona on the outside.
Yeah, definitely. And I see that. Like, I mean, I know it because, you know, we're in the national.
Yeah, if it's like a political line that we work on that.
Right, exactly.
I don't know.
Like
do you know?
Well, there are some things. One of them is not in my area, so I'm only going to mention it, but do not quote this. The Secretary of Economy has a main vision of the economic expansion of Mexico, which can be reduced to one word, one concept, as diversification. Diversification of industries, of where you export to and where you import from. Now, most of the exports that are made to the U.S. are mainly concern 5 states of all the American Union. So there's this diversifying those markets, and also of diversifying the markets out of the North American trade region. But of course, there is at the same time the TMEC, how do you say in English? The U.S. USMK, right? Which makes this more complex. But we are not the people here to address this issue. Now, in what concerns the Institute of Mexicans Abroad, we do have some programs for that. One of them is investment programs for this middle class of millions of people who have money they want to invest in Mexico. I have a colleague who came to see us in the Institute in Mexico City, and he was telling me this story last week. He has hundreds of investments in Mexico and in the US, in the immobiliary mostly, and construction, it's the same. But everything in Mexico is under the name of his wife, who is from the United States. Why? Because having the US nationality, it's much easier to invest in Mexico than being Mexican, which is completely wrong when you have 12 million people abroad. It's completely wrong. So that's one way of answering. And the other one is we have the Red Global, which is a network of specialist entrepreneurs, artists, etc., all around the world, which now has a bit less than 7,000 people. And we're going to recreate completely this project so that we can get to 20, 30,000 people. And the idea of this program is to create networking between them abroad, between them in different regions, and Mexico. And let me give an example how it works in other countries that we're trying to develop. If you have a friend who has a cousin who has a girlfriend whose father is the owner of Renault and you live in France, or the owner of Siemens if you live in Germany, well, maybe they want to invest in Mexico. Or maybe Cemex is looking to invest in Germany, but they don't know how, and you have the connections. The problem is, how do you connect these enterprises with Mexico or with the local government? Well, it's the work of the consulate, it's the work of Pro-Mexico, which doesn't exist anymore, as you know. So what we're trying to do is this network of, with all these people with relations, they should be able to connect with the consulate through this program we're doing to propose their own networking for programs of Mexico abroad and of Mexicans abroad in Mexico.
We're going to take 4 more questions from these 4 people who've been waiting for a little while, and then we'll... 2? 2 questions.
Buenas tardes. Tatiana, felicitarla primero porque usted fue parte importante de este triunfo de la Cuarta Transformación. Y al mismo tiempo preguntarle, porque yo y muchos como yo, como mexicanos, americanos, accidentalmente, ¿no? Primero por obra y gracia, primero del Tratado de Guadalupe Hidalgo, después del Tratado de la Mesilla, después por los casi 70 años del PRI y casi después más de los 36 o casi más de 30 años de neoliberalismo del PRIAN. Estamos algunos todavía viniéndonos para acá, ¿no? A usted, como parte importante de este triunfo, me gustaría preguntarle qué es lo que va a hacer o qué está haciendo usted para que no solamente el triunfo de México o de Andrés Manuel López Obrador ahora en la Cuarta Transformación se llegue a la realidad, ¿no? se asiente, pues. Porque estamos viendo que en México y tristemente también en los Estados Unidos se está replicando lo que está sucediendo en México. Actores que no han demostrado tener voluntad para hacer los grandes cambios, porque el PRI tenía buenos programas y el PAN tenía buenos programas, pero los actores no tenían voluntad para llevar a cabo esos programas. Hoy estamos viendo que se está replicando en la Cuarta Transformación esto, ¿no? Hablando de diásporas, que está diciendo Roberto ahorita, estas diásporas están viniendo ahora a la Cuarta Transformación de los prianistas. ¿Qué está haciendo usted como parte de esta piedra angular del cambio en México para que esto no se suceda? En Arizona, por ejemplo, bueno, en los Estados Unidos, pero en Arizona…
Es que estás hablando en español y muchos no entienden, entonces es una pregunta larga, si la puedes hacer corta o en inglés para que todos entiendan.
En Arizona se está repitiendo lo mismo, pues, se va a repetir lo mismo. Por ejemplo, nuestros cónsules, nuestros embajadores, nuestros representantes en los Estados Unidos están siendo o han sido pieza importante no solamente del prianismo, ¿no? Sino, por ejemplo, en Arizona, del Partido Republicano.
So the question is, how are you, Tatiana, how are you going to consolidate this fourth transformation of Mexico, given that there are actors in Mexico which are not necessarily going to follow what the new government is trying to do, and even in the consular activity of Arizona, you're saying it could be the case. So how are you going to consolidate this change from your perspective?
Okay, first of all, the first part, when you say that I was part of this big change, it was not only me. I think that the main thing that happened is that we all got involved. And since we all got involved, and that's maybe the answer for the second part, we all got involved, we were able to make this change. Actually, and I'm gonna send an advertisement already, in maybe less than a month, we're gonna have the book about the campaign coming out. And my book, yes. And I go back to the question is, it is not a matter of what am I gonna do. I have a personal agreement with myself that I do not like to keep on saying I don't like this, I don't like that. And instead of doing that, I say if I don't like something, I do something to change it, or I stop criticizing it. And this is for me what it is for la cuarta transformación. What am I gonna do to help the government achieve what they have to do? And when I say, what am I gonna do? It has many areas. One, am I gonna support it when it have things that I want them to be completed? If I'm gonna criticize or say that I don't like this when I don't like it, if I'm gonna be in charge and be putting my eyes on my congressman, congresswoman, as for that to happen, if we don't change that, nothing is gonna happen. I believe, and I see President Lopez Obrador working 60 hours a day, every day. But this is not a work of a person. He is the head of this project. He's an energy that helps a lot and that has very clear where we want to go. But the question is, what am I going to do for make that happen? And I go again. And you can hire somebody and make an error hiring that person, but never firing that person, because we all make mistakes. No? On the other hand, how am I going to be contributing for the things that that I don't like, especially on corruption, as for them to stop? And I think this is a two-way street. And I go back to the same. We as citizens have to participate. We as citizens have to keep an eye on. And I love when we say the citizens are the ones that pay taxes and the politicians are paid by those taxes. Okay, if I hire you, I have to supervise you. If I pay taxes, I want to know how my taxes are being used. And if we don't do that, nothing is going to change. I see what we promise on campaign. I'm going to keep on my eye on seeing that those things happen. And I'm going to do in Congress what I have to do. But the question is, what is every Mexican is going to do? And that would be my answer.
Primero, mi nombre es Blanca Calderón y decirle gracias por empoderar a la mujer. Eso es algo que muchas nos sentimos identificadas. Mi pregunta es…
Voy a interrumpir una vez más. Sí. Usted no puede ver en nadie lo que no tiene. Apropiéselo.
Sí. Perfecto. Sabemos que México tiene más tratados que cualquier otro país. No sé si está arriba de 40 tratados. Entre los más conocidos son 11, y entre ellos está el que hizo con Estados Unidos, Canadá y México. Desafortunadamente, los tratados anteriormente no han beneficiado a México, y mucho de eso es que la migración, la gente ha salido de México. El nuevo tratado que se acaba de firmar en estos meses atrás, la pregunta es para todos, ¿va a beneficiarle a México? ¿O caímos otra vez como en años anteriores?
Mira, yo no conozco el tratado a detalle, y ahorita te voy a decir, y hay gente que nos ha dicho que hay puntos que en lo pequeño hay que ver dónde están las comas. Te digo 2, 3 cosas así muy claras que estaban señaladas y que el Senado tendrá que revisar. Yo sí creo que le beneficiaron y la aplicación de eso fue lo que no se llevó bien. Porque se supone que dijeron en 7 años se iba a abrir la frontera para empezar a recibir importación de ciertas cosas. Y nos quedamos cruzados. Y cuando faltaban 5 meses dijimos, ¿y ahora qué vamos a hacer? Es decir, la autoridad no fue o no hizo su chamba para estarnos avisando, para crear políticas públicas para que nos preparáramos, para crear incentivos para que las cosas fueran sucediendo. Entonces, no sé si en todo es que estuvo mal hecho o lo aplicamos mal. Es como la privatización. Privatizaron Telmex y ni modo. Privatizaron Telmex, ¿es bueno o malo? Para mí la privatización fue buena. Lo que fue malo fue cómo lo hicieron. Y ese es el punto que tenemos que cuidar, los cómo. No sé si tú tengas algo que decir aquí, Roberto, no con lo de Telmex, sino en lo del tratado.
Bueno, es un tratado que tiene su importancia porque, hablando del TEMEC, ¿no? Tiene mucha importancia porque permite darle continuidad a toda una serie de proyectos y de estructuras económicas que son impresionantes porque no puedes frenarlas así nada más. México y Estados Unidos tienen 1 millón de cruces diarios. 1 millón de cruces, es una locura. Es la frontera más cruzada en el mundo, ¿no? Entonces, pensar que se pudiera terminar, pues, por decirlo menos, sería muy problemático para la situación actual. Luego, si el tratado y el nuevo tratado, que es muy similar al anterior, implica beneficios o pérdidas para ambos países, es una discusión técnica que sería muy larga y con muchos matices. Creo que Tatiana tiene razón en que por lo pronto tenemos que insistir en el cómo se dan las cosas a partir de las políticas públicas y también del interés político, o sea, de la voluntad política, quería decir, de ambos países. Una cosa al menos es que el nuevo tratado insiste más sobre ciertos derechos, derechos de los trabajadores, derecho a la sindicalización, unionizing, bueno, perdón, estoy hablando en español, es muy importante. Entonces tiene buenos elementos.
On the same topic. So NAFTA 2.0, I won't call it what Trump wants to call it, does include many, so you were talking about the possibility of labor protections, but it kind of touches on all of this, right? It touches on labor, the environment, public health. But there's provisions, but they're not quite fleshed out on labor protections. There's provisions that would allow some of these U.S. oil companies to continue their contracts. There's carve-outs for them. There's, as far as I understood, and there's things that would limit the ability of the government to purchase generic medicines. So, you know, there is a new Congress in the United States that has a very different point of view than our obviously our president, whose days are numbered. And the Congress...
Lopez Obrador. No, I'm joking.
But, you know, at this point, at least in the U.S., as far as I know, the Congress can, you know, say a lot about what goes into this final deal. And what are you willing to fight on? Because I hope that you're willing to fight on it. And, yeah, will you vote for this?
The vote goes in the Senate, not on Congress. And I think, again, that on the genetics, on health issues, there is a subject there. And I believe that when they go over it comma by comma, They will see things and they're gonna have to make a point.